Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this important session. Greetings from the regional office of UN Environment in Panama. We are right now about to launch the publication of solutions based on nature for resilient cities for facing climate change, perspectives and experiences of Latin America. Marta Moneo, I coordinate the team of adaptation to climate change here at the regional office. And from here, is what we have started already several years ago through the City Adapt project that initially, and then it gave birth to the Nature for Cities project, which right now is being replicated with different proposals across the region. So specifically, there were the first projects where UN Environment started working in adaptation to climate change, and particularly solutions based in nature for adaptation in the urban environment. Previously, we had focused a lot of our efforts and strategies around working with areas or working with areas in rural areas with vulnerable people, but the vision and understanding of our ecosystem that was also part of our cities and the importance that cities have in regards of the concentration of population, in regards of the concentration of financial activities, and also the concentration of vulnerabilities that's increasing by the processes of urban development that many times have been disorganized, not planned, and that makes it for the population to face climate risks that are quite strong in regards of floods, slides, heat waves, droughts. So, with that spirit of trying to understand how to design strategies for adaptation to climate change, focused in urban areas and at that local level, but taking into account what were the services and the functions that ecosystems can provide in that sense to favor adaptation and increase resiliency of citizens facing climate change. And that's why this See Adapt initiative was born throughout 5 years. And it's a whole joy for us to also introduce this presentation because this is a project that's finalizing. It's been 5 years of a lot of intense learning of all of us uh, with the authors of the publication, the publishing that we've shared with, and today we'll talk about learning. So also about evolution in our concepts from the initial phases of the project. When I remember that we were discussing how were these analysis of vulnerability going or happening, or how to consider functions of ecosystems in the construction or building of resiliency, how the different actors or stakeholders participate, and how do we establish these dialogue platforms and decision making? What is a part of the key part that financial mechanisms have, and how do we finance these interventions? We realized in that first stage of the limited information that we had, that being maybe a new concept and that's been evolving, and by the limited information that we also had, particularly in Spanish, and with concrete examples of the region, where stakeholders in the region were able to feel identified and were able to learn that knowledge that's happening in the region. So that's the origin of this publishing, where we think that it will be really interesting to have one of these publishings where we can have the expertise that we have in the region that have led the publishing with examples of our region. We'll talk with these leaders and we'll have that takeaway as a learning source and to apply to different cities and projects that are similar to this. And the publishing is available already at the web page in the platform of CD Adapt. And we cannot download the application just yet. In the next few days, we will be able to, but you can access all the content in the link that we share with you. So I'll open this space for this panel, talk about what are the main takeaways that we picked up from this publishing. And thank you very much again to all of the authors. And on one side, also thanks to the team in at the regional office that's also made a huge effort to have this publishing ready and available for all of us. So have a good day. Thank you, Martha, for your welcoming remarks. Let me retake the hosting of this event to welcome everyone that's joining us through YouTube. I also work at the UN Environment Program. My name is Hopefully. I work with PNUMA, and I just wanted to officially open the space for the publishing, for the release of our of publishing. As Martha said, this is a work of many organizations, of experts of different research organizations of all the region. And we wanted to thank you for real for all of your collaboration across this exercise. So to start, I wanted to first remind you all of our agenda for the day. We've had our welcoming remarks from Martha, and now I'll take a minute to also introduce our whole panel of experts, the authors of this publishing, and we will have a moment where Lydia and Jose are going to tell us the main takeaways of this publishing, how we were able to work in it, what are the main findings and takeaways, and we will have three short panels where we would have authors to reflect, or not just on the main takeaways of the publishing, but also about different reflections that unchain off of these events. And we will have finally some closing remarks from Martha after this conversation with our experts. So up next, we will ask you to pay a bit of attention in all of these presentations. We have many members of experts and experts here, which we thank quite a lot for their contribution to this publishing. We have first up with the editor and the author of the first chapter, Daniel Kosak, who wrote the key concepts for the adaptation and publishing this. It is an architect and urbanist, and he's director of Habitat Energy with the National Council of Argentinian Techniques for Jobs. And he's a stakeholder for the Alcoholista, and he is currently working in the research project of Connexis from the European Union in the framework of 2020. Is a speaker for the IDP, but also the development nation of Argentina, working as a guide in the integration sector for adaptation to climate change in urban areas of Argentina. So, Daniel, thank you very much and welcome. Now, let me introduce Manuel Inogat, who is the author of Chapter 2, that's called Analysis of Climate Change and How to Use It in the Planning and Development of Cities. He's done it in contribution of Vigil and Open. Both of them work for Anibal University. He works with tools of support for decision making adaptation to climate change, working with sustainability indicators and vulnerability indicators, and strengthening capacities to share this information and adapt it to the planning within the evaluation of ecosystemic services. Now, let me introduce Jorge Lin Arroyo. She was the author of Chapter 3, uh, TBN making, and Jorgelina is licensed and master in geography. He has been general coordinator and senior researcher in the International Institute of Environment and Development, and for Latin America, UNEP as its acronym. This response to environmental problems in uh, troublesome neighborhoods, strengthen climate resiliency, improving capacities of adaptation, etc. Currently, he co-coordinated implementation of projects of coalition and Argentinian implementation. So welcome. And also Begonia, she was the author of chapter 4, Infrastructure Resilient in Urban Adaptation. Begonia is a planner and she works as a senior consultant and landscape architecture and territorial organization in Deltares. She also is based her work in nature and ecosystems in this whole participative process with local governments and communities to improve resiliency and reducing disasters that come off of or risk that come off of disasters. I'm sorry, just a second, let me fix something here. There's some technical problems, I'm sorry. And now we'll go with the presentation of Melinda, who was the author of Chapter 5, Panorama of the Planning Instrument and Financing that Support Urban SDNs. Melinda is an Argentinian attorney with a convalidated degree in Colombia, director in urban studies from the University of Sarmiento from 2001, specialist in real estate and law. And Melinda is a professor of the Latin American Program and Caribbean of the Lincoln Institute for Territorial Policy and different programs of PhD of the region. She worked as a PNUMA consultant, independent consultant, to support and solutions for resilient cities. Now we go with the three authors of Chapter 6, analysis evaluating of the impact of SBN. So we have first the leadership of Tom Wall, who works at the Department of Architecture for landscape of the Sheffield University in Great Britain. He's a main researcher for the Connexus project from the 2020 Horizon project from the European Union. He specializes in aquatic ecosystems and riverlands ecosystems and practices. Tom has a lot of experience in the financial valuation of green and blue structure and as solution based in nature as sustainable EBITDA and the decontamination, depollution of the fluvial system. And Mariana Justic is also present here. And welcome for the architecture of the Buenos Aires University, expert in geography and a master in urban studies. She's co-founder in the Baku. She works as a researcher professor with a PhD of the Sevilla University in the Human Geography Department. And Marina works also in solutions based in nature, green projects, and also a part of the Connexus program that you've heard by many authors. We also have Mariana Batista, which unfortunately wasn't able to be in today's panel, but it's important to name her because that's why I'm going to introduce her briefly. Mariana is a researcher and doctor in social studies. He has worked also at the Sheffield University, also focused on CBN for Latin America and Europe, focusing more in the social environmental benefits of nature and cities and how is it present in context of planning and urban planning. It was quite a long introduction, but we wanted to have a little bit of time to introduce all of the authors as fast as we could because this comes uh, with its own load of work from a long time. And as you can see, we have people from different research centers from across the region and from the different points of view for the different chapters. So now that we have the brief introduction, I'll open up to Lili Leba, who is a specialist in adaptation from PNUMA, from the National Program for Environment. And I know that she will introduce herself and that so she can give us the first point of view and the climate change point of view in the region of Latin American Caribbean. So Lily and Daniel's floor is yours. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be able to share this thrilling moment for our team, the release of the publishing of this. I'm a part of the team of adaptation in the PNUMA's office in Latin America and Caribbean. And just a while ago, we heard some remarks about the level of exposure and vulnerability in the Latin American region and Caribbean. But we live in a context where we are under a high exposure to different types of hazards related to the climate, like cyclones, typhoons, droughts, heat waves, and so on. And as you can see, some pieces of data here from last year, 2022, highlighting maybe the dimension mention of the impact of extreme events that come off of climate change and looking at the climate events that or that have happened with more frequency, who are the affected people. Over 10 million people in the region have been affected, and the financial impact of over $9 billion have been the financial impact for the region based or as a consequence of extreme events more than anything, floods, storms, floods, and droughts. In this context, is worsening, particularly with the ENSO phenomenon that we're experiencing this year. And that's just to put in evidence what the impact will be next year. That will probably be greater. Latin America and Caribbean have built the second most organized region in the world. So we are experiencing this type of problems in the cities of our countries. Next one, please. So here we have cities where they are highly exposed and vulnerable to all of these risks that we have mentioned: uh, floods, extreme rainfall, or droughts. We also have a dimension of inequality and poverty that's increasing inequality and climate crisis in cities of the region. The report of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change warns us that the region is already being affected by many of these extreme events, and that during 2020 till 2022, we've registered a total of over 175 disasters in the region, out of which 88% had a meteorological climate or type of origin. Again, we have to remember that over 80% of the population lives in urban cities, and 48% of the seven capitals of the region present a serious risk facing climate change. Now, however, the good news here is that we have these sub-effective areas that have multiple benefits with them, like solutions based in nature. Next one. Now, based in nature basically offer a series of significant benefits, like reducing heat waves, improving water management, reducing risk associated to floods or with mudslides, and it will decrease the number of victims and financial losses. And as we can already know about, there's this urban artificial landscapes that we can build. And here, what we would like to emphasize is that these natural areas that are being used for urban resiliency need to integrate a multidimensional approach. We know already the necessary steps to plan and to implement solutions based in nature through through webinars and the guides that we've been developing throughout our platform FishAdapt, and the specific elements such as how to get to know the context of understanding what are the challenges of creating this vision of adaptation, but also designing specific and technical solutions based in nature, implementing them, and after monitoring them and evaluating them, they really need this approach, a multidisciplinary approach. Definitely, on one side, on one end, we have to integrate or to define specific solutions of the nature based solutions can be adapted to unique matters, regions, and ecosystems. So they need to take into account the local biodiversity, climate conditions, and cultural practices to be able to maximize its effectiveness. It's important to also take into account uh, ecosystems based decision making to have some kind of horizontality in the public policies, in the national strategies and local strategies. And as for the concrete specific implementation, and there we need this decision making, this planning to be based in scientific evidence of monitoring of good practices. And this approach would ensure that interventions are effective and that provides measurable and real benefits. The other dimension could be inclusion and equality. These solutions or solutions based in nature have as an objective to benefit all of the members of society, including marginal communities or marginalized communities. So they will include in their design the ecosystem and the benefits that are being generated for the solutions. And the solutions based in nature require collaboration among the different disciplines, including ecology, social sciences, economy, and engineering. This transdisciplinary approach would ensure a wholesome understanding of these challenges that we find sometimes in the in our trajectory of implementation of this nature-based solutions and their escalation. So these aspects that have been considered within the publishing, it's what generated for us to invite all these experts that come from different disciplines to really provide this wholesome vision, multidimensional vision of solutions based in nature, and to be able to function as a important tool and as an informational tool with evidence of cases in the region to try and support planning process implementation and scaling up of this urban resiliency projects. And with that, let me go back, return. I'll give the mic to Daniel so he can tell us more about the structural objectives. Thank you very much, Lily and hopefully and Martha for the introduction and for this collaborative work and the explanation they've given us. We're really happy to be introducing this. So, in regards of the main objective for this publishing, first off, we are interested with this publishing to be able to provide approaches, points of view, and tools to professionals or urban planning so they can understand, evaluate, plan, and overall to act better facing climate change in the cities. One of the main conductor threats of this book that reflects something that we specify in specialized bibliography is how do we overcome these pilot projects and demonstratives of solutions based in nature, and how do we generate transformative changes for urban resiliency. And when we're talking about to overcoming the pilot stage, we're talking about at least three dimensions. The first one being to be able to achieve projects of a higher level, also more land coverage, but mainly and fundamentally what we are thinking about is how can we turn this nature-based solutions into the conventional solutions that are basically at the reach of this gray, as the gray infrastructure is, whenever infrastructure problems arise. So how can we make the mainstream or the conventional status this nature-based solution? So next one, please. Well, so from there, from this objective and from this main question, how do we structure this book? So if it's true, each one of these chapters can be read autonomously, and as a matter of fact, in Kitadata's site, is well built for it to be the case. This book offers also a possible order of reading that can also be some sort of implementation model of solutions based in nature. So the first chapter provides us the theoretical but it introduces the concept of SBN and discusses the part that urban the nature-based solutions can provide to urban planning. And the second chapter of climate risk in cities will establish a methodology for the evaluation of climate risks, with the main objective of producing operational data according to our comprehensive data and with the hope of putting it into practice to translate knowledge into concrete actions that will affect positively in urban planning. The third chapter about citizens participation has to highlight the importance of building these participative processes involving key stakeholders in the implementation of solutions based in nature in cities. And one of the main solutions that I'm able to, well, that this chapter gets to, is to take advantage of one of the opportunities that we see from the theoretical framework to improve planning of cities. From a perspective which is integrated and participative, which is more focused into solving vulnerabilities and that are environmentally sustainable. The fourth chapter about resilient infrastructure that especially tries to to answer the question how do we implement these nature-based solutions, analyzes the potential of SBNs and the hybrid solutions, meaning the combination, the mix of nature-based solutions and with conventional solutions of engineering in a way that can enact in a marriage so we can reduce impacts and risks in cities. The chapter focuses on technical aspects of governance and monitoring and evaluation as well for the design and implementation of nature-based solutions, NBS. Yes. This next chapter is for planning and urban planning, and I tested out one of the uses of soil territory instruments that goes from planning to implementation and to look after adequate models of local financing. Finally, the last chapter of analysis and evaluation of NBSs answers the question why are these nature-based solutions important? It identifies the main references of a financing and evaluation and also describes possible implementation models and deepens into the core benefits of nature-based solutions and the valuing framework of it. Well, on top of that, just as we mentioned at the beginning, all of these chapters provide us with examples that would illustrate concrete examples of implementation in the region, which are different possibilities at the different scales and characteristics that under the selecting criteria, which was a big chunk of the collaborative work that we carried out also in this publishing. We also took into account the possible geographic distribution, the thematic distribution, and that way we were able to get to 11 cases. Here we only have six with QR codes. So if at any point you want to scan the QR code, you can already have a small advance of this book. But the main objective of this vignettes of cases or these specific cases to identify in concrete situations how can concrete problems be solved through BNSs. So, or hybrid solutions. Thank you very much. And now we can go back to our dialogue between authors. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Now that we have a good idea about how this polishing took place, what the structure that we have, and a vision of the different authors, now we're going to go to our first panel where we're going to have Jorgelina, Begonia, and Manuel where probably we can have a bit of exchange between them, how about how these chapters communicate with each other. So I don't know if for Helena you're okay with it. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for this invite and congratulations to the whole group for this. And I hope that it is off of every reader's interest. And I hope it serves to improve management and planning. Olga, Manuel, Vela, Begonia, I wanted to tell you first off, I'll ask you a question. How was citizens' participation in the implementation of solutions based in nature? In both chapters, we've highlighted the importance of generating processes and solutions that respond to the real needs of the territory. So that's a little bit of how the participation looks like, or citizen participation looks like in this, the generation of these responses. Who can start, Begonia or Manuel? Manuel, I think. Manuel, okay. So good morning. Thank you very much for the invite to everyone. Welcome everyone, and I hope that your this publishing finds you well. And publishings are always a process, and they are harder than a birth because it takes up to 2 years. But the question is a bit hard. Let's be quick because we don't have much time. And this is something a bit between chapter two, between 1 and 3. And it's only conceptual. But the first thing that we need to consider is that risk and vulnerability analysis are specific to the context and the place. This is not generic. This implicates or in that processes of or analysis or risk analysis themselves need to be considered as a medium to build a process where the stakeholders' participation is key because we need to identify hazards, vulnerabilities, because there's not only one in a way to be able to explore based of needs and of stakeholders and cities that have particular context to understand what are the adaptation possibilities. That's why we have a huge challenge that requires of the citizens' participation, and that's that in evaluation processes we need to relate the levels that we are making the decisions at neighborhoods, communities, cities, metropolitan areas, etc., with the stakeholders with their decisions, like leaders, local authorities, municipal governments, entities that are decentralized. This is extremely important, and without the participation, evaluations only become a diagnosis and has no use. So, with that participation of stakeholders, the vulnerability analysis that, as I mentioned, is a medium to build a process enables us to integrate the vision of technique or the technical vision needs of community perceptions that are not always because perceptions as a technician or a scientist you can identify differently from others. And we need to balance a bit the planning processes and decision making processes, and also this helps out towards a process. This citizen participation or all stakeholders participation helps out to reduce the risk of an excessive politicization of actions to ensure the support to these processes and separate them from decrees or mandates that are only of short terms. And every time there's a new election, things might change. But in a way, in this way, we can get the support of stakeholders with the means of really having a causing a significant incidency in public policies. So I would like to finish by saying that it's extremely important to have participation within the process of evaluation because this is what really will allow us to build information, creating capacities, and making sure that assessments or analysis of vulnerability or risk can respond to the needs and demands of the stakeholders in their own planning process. And finally, it's extremely necessary, use and useful for you to be careful with the fact that you need to pay special attention, as I said at the beginning, to the process, mapping of stakeholders, etc., and not just the methods and methodologies and indicators that, even though they might be really important, we don't have a fixed rule regulation because they depend on the particularities of the context and each of the cities. That's why we need to take into account that these practices in regards to the methodology, etc., needs to, or we need to be really careful with, particularly because when you evaluate that, it right now it's relatively easy because you know what's happening. But when you try to analyze, like in the case of climate change and nature-based solutions, where you need to think about the future, uncertainty increases quite a lot. And that's one of the main aspects that Daniel mentions about how can we go from the pilot to the more specific experience. And this the thing is that uncertainty right now is quite big. And so that's a little bit of what I would have to say in a summary just for 2 minutes instead of going on for 1 hour like I used to. Begonia, you have the mic now. Many of the things, much of the things that Daniel says it resonates with me with nature-based solutions. And one of these things is what you mentioned, Manuel, about
soluciones sin,
how
en tu caso,
solutions,
cómo en general se
in
necesita
your case, and overall, how do we need citizens' participation to be able to customize that information? How can we implement the nature-based solutions that are enrooted in the piece of territory and not to have like a standardized solution and maybe generic solution? And I think it's the duty of proposers that to have these nature-based solutions proposed facing governments and whomever it is. So it's important for these makers to create enough spaces for citizens to participate. And this is throughout the process, not just in the planning or implementation, but also during maintenance and monitoring and nature-based solution process. And of course, this can take a different shape, a different way of
un piloto de una
happening,
solución y
but
involucrar
without having a pilot based with solution based in nature. So we can see with this pilot what the impact might be that this solution might have in that environment. But we also have different examples, such as the usage of citizen science, so we can develop monitoring of nature-based solutions. For example, in water quality, I see many cases in many countries how the citizenship monitors water quality in an area because it has the direct impact in what they have or in their immediate environment. So I don't know how long do I have in overall, but I just leave it at that right now because we have many more people that have something to say. So thank you very much. Thank you, Begonia. I think that just to add something up, it's interesting what you both said about how the integration of participation in different stages of a process can also at the same time strengthen the quality of a participation itself and improving processes such as it's sort of like a virtuous circle. So let me go to the next question and whomever wants to answer. Yeah, thank you, Manuel and Begonia. It's important to understand that part of citizens' participation. We were looking at that in chapter 3, and that's where we have seen that all the tools for implementation and planning and pilots for those are really important. So it's important to also at the same time study case studies or to have examples such as these case studies. Well, let's go back to our main agenda and now we go to our next panel. We'll kidnap Manuel from the first panel and we'll now go with him also for the second. Thank you. Now I'm on the other side of the wall. But now let me, the question would be basically important to divide it in three parts. For Melinda, Tom, and Mariana to be able to answer to a bit of it. So just looking at and following up with the chapters from climate risk analysis and vulnerability assessment, we would like to see what your reflection is from your different perspectives about what are the implications that these analysis should have when, for example, for Melinda,
instrumentos urbanísticos o la planificación territorial.
when planning and using this urbanistic instrument and to have something more concrete. And that's for Melinda. For Tom, it would be interesting due to Tom's experience to have him have this, for example, risk analysis. What are the implications that this analysis should or could have, but more when assessing the impact of the solutions based in nature, maybe more from a conceptual perspective, given that Tom works in different regions. And for Mariana, we maybe that same question as for Tom, but from a more concrete case study in the chapter that you made, like in the Medellin's case. So those will be sort of the questions. Okay, so let me get to my part. Hi, Melinda. Thank you very much. In Argentina, it's already afternoon, so good afternoon for Argentinian people. From the point of view of urban planning and the approach that this chapter has, I just wanted in a simple way to answer it and maybe take the first step. The first thing that urban planning needs to do is recognizing these climate objectives. And this might be a bit obvious, but it's not as much because maybe in many Latin American cities and municipalities, they work differently. So climate change on one side, environment in another, which is in charge of urban matters, and that sometimes translates into urban plans not to connect at the end. And despite that, we're seeing as a more incipient point to link these topics, like in Quito, Bogota's case, where we recognize these climate challenges, we take that climate risk position, and from the recognition of it, we make important decisions for urban planning, like the classification, which is the first thing that needs to take place in urban planning. And this is really important for the other side, which is the second stage. And that's after knowing what are the climate risks, you need to know where are located and looking at the city as a more wholesome piece of land. Now, the second question is how do we make or with which instruments or specific instruments with which money? And that we have a lot of uh, points to figure out here in Latin America because we don't use many instruments of for soil management or there's not much money. So there's a lot of possibilities of generating resources at local level. And this chapter talks about instruments based on that. That from a perspective or a juridical standpoint or point of view, we can ensure it in different groups, like with tax groups, with improvement in taxes and tariffs, and another group with urbanistic approach, where will be all of the requirements that are specific, that are demanded previously to the construction licenses to be approved for urbanization as well. So it's really timely to ask for something and to enable some factors. So this chapter represents and shows this instrument as a variety of instruments and with specific goals. The constitution by improvement, like in Bogota in Colombia, where there were sustainable drainage systems installed. And we've seen some other recent projects, and luckily they're still in functioning. In Quito, that's another case. They use this space of sustainability to achieve a basic and maximum building range based on rights. And just to close this question, I like the way that question was asked because what can we do? What is there to do? What can we do? Because there's a whole scheme for all of these aspects, but the question that needs to be crucial, that needs to call our attention is what should cities do? In urban right, we have a really beautiful principle, which is a public function of urbanism. that's already connected to that having to do something, no longer being objective, but actually that focuses in urbanism and the need to establish solutions for the solutions to be real and implemented.
Yeah, thank you very much to the organizers and the publishers, the authors and the editor. And thank you particularly for providing interpretation. I think it's available to the translation into Spanish as well. So my reaction would be that the main issue is that it really depends on the specific type of intervention being implemented and the intended purpose of the nature-based solution. So, for instance, sustainable urban drainage systems or SUDs address water quality, water quantity, and biodiversity issues, as well as aesthetics. They're designed to reduce flooding, treat diffuse pollution, create natural habitats, and also hopefully look good too. And these intended outcomes clearly point to what we can and what we should evaluate, what we should measure, what we should monitor. So different interventions, such as a green fence built around a school, may be designed to improve air quality or improve students' well-being and wildlife habitat. So in that case, we'd focus instead on monitoring air pollutants, also linked with climate change due to urban heat island effect and smogs, which are especially important for people with breathing conditions like asthma. Monitoring biodiversity benefits of a school green fence might be best considered in terms of the student's knowledge of nature. But of course, there's more to it than that. There's evidence that sustainable urban drainage systems, SUDs, can also contribute to air quality improvements. And interventions such as green roofs can have wide benefits, including heat savings and reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, all of these impacts are cashable. They can be analyzed economically. However, some of the problems also arise when we try to value everything or to make such complex models or monetary assessments that the central point gets lost. It might get lost amongst too much information and demands for more and more data. So I think the main point is that we should monitor for the key impacts that the stakeholders have at heart, including the designers, the citizens, the clients, and the site managers. That way, the narrative, the compelling story for nature-based solutions becomes much clearer, along with the convincing evidence of their benefits. And of course, their cost effectiveness should then become much more evident too. And Mariana, yeah.
Hola, buenos días, buenas tardes. Gracias a los
Good
organizadores.
day, good afternoon. Thanks to the organizers. And just continuing what Tom said, we have an example here that we provided in this chapter about the analysis and evaluation of impact based in climate change analysis. And we have assessed that 40 and with different experts, where we saw that the tool for heat resilient cities, and the important of this analysis is that it allows us to get in a really simple way financial and health data that will allow us to make visible how important it is to prioritize and justify these interventions, these climate interventions. As Manuel explained, in the case that we shown, we developed one of the cases that was tested out in Latin America, which was these 36 green corridors of Medellin, the also recovery of Ipiranga body of water. And that's something that we've published in scientific articles with data that came from different cases. But this allows us to obtain data that is really important about what the reduction is, about this urban load, that or what is the action or the result that this action will take, and after a year's time, what are the results? Are we going over the risk thresholds, or where are we? Then what is the financial impact of avoided casualties, for example, or deaths, the avoided death themselves. So all of these, what type of data provides us? Avoided deaths by themselves and the financial impact that gives us information. So this tool represents a process that's rather complex that gives us indicative data. These are not definitive pieces of data, but these are the first steps to be able to generate more complex relations with a greater definition. Thank you, Mariana, Tom, and Melinda. I think, Feli, that now you can take the mic because time is the only thing that we don't have lots of, and we just have to close it out. So thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much also to Tom, Mariana, and Melinda. It's important to have these different perspectives, and we also like to thank the interpreter for going from English to Spanish. But it's important to have all these expertise, and even though it's in different languages. But now we just have to go to panel 3, and let's invite Begonia as well back to this last panel, and we'll have also Jorge Lima, and also we'll have Daniel. So please, Begonia. Thank you, Ophelie. Yeah, I'll just go straight to the questions. Taking time into consideration. Well, I guess there's a lot to say, but I would like to, in the chapter that I wrote on resilient infrastructure, I made some sort of a bridge between threats that was what Manuel was explaining in chapter 2 and solutions implementation that covers those threats and how nature-based solutions would cover different challenges, and as Lydia said, and they can also contribute to sustainable development. So whenever we were thinking about the implementation of solutions based in nature and how can we ensure the functioning is one part of the question, right? So how can this be included in the governance and urban governance plans? That's what I would like to open the mic first to I believe it's Lily. It's been a while since you give us the main presentation, but can you share something of it?
Muchas gracias por la
Are you there?
pregunta.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question.
Sí, realmente quizás puedo dar una visión más regional.
I might give you a more regional view
La sostenibilidad,
in regards to sustainability, maintenance, based on governance.
como mencioné al inicio,
How, and as I
pues,
mentioned at the beginning,
se necesita un enfoque.
we need a multidimensional approach.
Para poder lograr eso,
And to be able to achieve that,
seguir
it's really important to follow up and to continue generating knowledge, information, so we can
fortalecer, informar
strengthen and inform nature-based solutions to the region. And in regards to vulnerability analysis and risk for the cities, to be able to provide or to give out better information at the local level can also serve as examples about how the rest of the cities have been integrating this type of information in their planning. On one side, we have that, but also we have the generation of evidences. So definitely, it's important to achieve a more effective adaptation of nature-based solutions in planning and decision making, but also the use of the implementation, where we see it's important to invest and encourage and prioritize information and data gathering of informing practices or good practices and documenting this case studies that have been successful, to also be able to generate this type of lessons learned throughout the region, to be able to generate a regional vision about how nature can play an important role in planning and in strategies at the regional level, but also at the national level as a guide. And also, in the other hand, it will be to go through the exchange of knowledge, maybe through practical units that can facilitate this exchange among the different local stakeholders of government, of the financial sector, of the private sector, of communities, of experts, and of the academic world, etc. And maybe not to forget some of these monitoring elements because we are learning quite a lot about documentation, about evaluation of the efforts that we are paying at the national level. So we can probably go on with these lessons learned that can be the most important ones for the region, meaning that we can think about a framework of monitoring and a relevance level with indicators that can report us about this, can inform us about the efforts that are taking place locally in the region. So these elements of knowledge generation, of planning and evidence-based decision making, exchange of knowledge, it would be they would be important elements at the regional level to have sustainability and to enable or encourage implementation of this planning and governance at the regional level that can be used afterwards as a guide at the national and local level. This will be it, really briefly, what I can tell you, so I can have give a little bit of space to other panelists. Thank you very much, Lily, for that general outlook. Now I would like to give the mic to Daniel. Can you just complement a bit of what Lily is mentioning? Thank you very much, Begonia. And just to complement and to give you a national landscape, let me go back to two concepts that Lily also introduced at the beginning. It's fundamental to have dynamic management structures at the national level that would allow us to cover that multidimensionality, just as this experience has been, and interscalability of nature-based solutions. And that's required, meaning we need to find out about governmental structures that can work with these compartments and these stages that are considered historically to be managed by disciplinary fields. So to implement that asset, it's important to have the expertise and a really flown and fluent collaboration in between ecology, landscaping, urban right, economy, among different other fields. First off, national government needs to ensure that the organization for the management to include this type of facing, and not less important, it's also necessary to have management structures capable of facing this type of scales. And these geographic necessary scales not necessarily coincide with the managemental and jurisdictional limits that were outlined with different criteria. So we need management infrastructure for hydrographic basins, such as committees for basins or basin authorities, but this many times doesn't happen. And we also need to fiscalize or use different geographic scales, operational at the operational level, at the ecosystemic level, or at the landscape level, meaning to adapt bureaucratic traditional systems to the scales and certain dimensions of ecosystems and the geomorphology that give support to the nature-based solutions. I'll just let me cut it here so we can have space to the local scale and focus vision. Thank you, Daniel. So now we open the mic for Jorgelina. If you can complement Daniel and Lily's answers, please.
Bueno,
Yeah.
pensando un poquito en lo
Well,
local.
thinking a little bit about the local approach and how to carry out the sustainability. As we mentioned before, and when we're talking about participation, a little bit of the participatory process, it starts or generates this solution process, this nature-based solutions process to happen. This is a part of a good governance, and this is seen locally many times. Whenever we see that good results overall go hand in hand with processes where a collaboration among local governments, local private stakeholders, civil society, where they have been able to work collaboratively, everyone providing with their own solutions, diverse resources, And throughout this process, we generate trust in, in the process that basically generate that sustainability throughout time. And I think a really good example of it is that it's included in the chapter, which is the Rosario City, with all of the urban planning and green belt. How since they were working since 2001 with civil stakeholders generating public policies in at the local level in urban planning, climate action, and they incorporated the urban agriculture as a key part of their management too. And nowadays that keeps on working and growing. Almost 23 years in the make or in the works. So it's also important to highlight, and I mentioned this as important because participation and being able to support measures throughout time as a key point of sustainability shouldn't just take for granted. It, it's not something that happens instantaneously, and it's not an element to just check on a list. You need to think about it, design it, and think it throughout the process. And understanding that each place is unique and that requires its own processes and timeframes. So it's good for us to take that into account because it really gives a lot of importance to the process development, but also we're not thinking quite well about how to develop them and the time and resources that are needed to keep on developing this process across stages, as Lilia said at the beginning, from the point of the diagnose till the implementation, evaluation, and the monitoring, etc. So with that, I'm done. Thank you very much, Helena. Among the three of you, I think that that makes a full good response. And with that, I would like to go back to Ophelie. Thank you, Begonia, and thank you, Lily, for your answers. As a really this big outline of all of the scopes and approaches geographically and all the stages of the project itself. So we are a bit over time, but I think it was important to hear each and one of you from your own perspectives, from your own expertise, and the chapters that you were able to write. So now we'll close the event, and let me go back and give the floor back to Namonia, our coordinator for Penuma, for our closing remarks. Thank you, Ophelie, and thank you everyone for your participation and for the effort of these last few months in the developing or in the making of this publishing. So in today's session, we wanted to make a brief overview about what were the main elements of this publishing, what was the focus, and what were the key takeaways that we can get off of this and that we can read in the publication. If I had maybe to finish off with a message that I think it came up in every panel was integration. Integration from the different perspectives, from the perspective of analysis first when we are designing adaptation strategies for climate change for cities, and how important it is to consider an approach of getting to the city as an built environment, but also considers the basin or the landscape where these cities are located to understand risk in a more general way and to define solutions that are efficient to face these challenges or these risks. Integration also from the point of view of stakeholders, how the different stakeholders of the government and civil society participate of this process of designing, of planning of cities. And they are considered these differentiated needs from the different stakeholders during planning.
Elementos de la ciencia y
And
la
also of the different elements of science and politics for decision making. How do we use this analysis based on science to understand risk and to understand the impact that different solutions may provide? And also the tools and the instruments that we might use that are at the reach of our hand that can be created, that can be designed to favor the implementation of these strategies and their sustainability across time. I think that these are the main elements and takeaways that you will be able to see reflected in this publishing. In this publishing has been, as we said, a lengthy type of work of also a work of integration among all of the different authors. But we hope that it is something that is long lasting, that can hold itself through time. And we'll let you know about future exchanges, meetings, and get-togethers that will take place in Nature for the Cities platform, which are still active. And with any further ado, thank you very much. Thank you to Practical Action colleagues that have been an important stakeholder in the submission or publishing of this. So, good day to all of you, and we'll see each other soon. Thank you.
Gracias.